Hey, nowhere else in the world would we climb an ice fall like this. Nowhere. You'd be nutter.
Number one thing is you have to be very mentally prepared for it.
Welcome to Nepal.
Thank you so much.
Climb the Mount Everest, right?
That's where I'm going.
The Sherpas regard it as a very sacred mountain.
This monastery was built in the 16th century. At that time, this monastery was already destroyed once by the Everest.
I've never been to this country before. I've never been to the Khumbu Valley. Never been to Mount Everest. It's not about this mountain. It's about you guys.
Becoming mountain guy is not easy.
I want to say, all girls, you should come and you can follow your dream.
To camp tour, it looks okay, and after that, I'll let you know.
What piece of advice would you give someone?
If you want to climb the mountain and go back to your home, just prepare for it before you come here.
Be scared and be intimidated and be humble.
There's a lot of crevasse, open crevasse.
I came to Nepal on a quest to explore this captivating country and to honor a childhood promise. But I leave with so much more.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Carolyn Talks. This is the YouTube channel / podcast where I, your host, Carolyn Harz, film culture critic and journalist, speak to film creatives around the world about their work, the industry, and what inspires them. And this is my second interview for 2025. And I am very happy to be joined by filmmaker, adventurer, mountaineer, expeditionist, Alex Harz, to talk about his documentary, The Quest, Conquering Mount Everest. And I'm very excited for this film because Mount Everest is, as you would know, is the tallest mountain in the world with its summit of 29,000, I think 32 meters. And it is considered the ultimate challenge of endurance, and athleticism and mind over, and the basis of mind over matter, which we'll definitely get into. And I've watched many films about Everest, whether they're fictional films about, people going on expeditions, whether it's documentaries about Nepal or just like documentaries on National Geographic about, about the climate there, and talking about the challenges of this isolated place in the world. But I'm so very excited to talk to Alex today. So thank you so much for joining me. Yay.
It's great to talk to you, Carolyn. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. So my first question will be, I want to ask you, so how did you get into filmmaking? Or first of all, made you decide to make a film about your quest to get to the summit of Mount Everest?
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting question. Basically what happened was I used to live in Omaha, Nebraska, in the flat farmlands of the Midwest here in the United States. And I used to play soccer or football all the time. And after a long, lengthy 2 to 3 hours soccer practice, I came home, sat on my couch, had my bag of Cool Ranch Doritos and Mountain Dew, probably the worst thing to possibly eat. But, I was young and 14 years old, burning that off. So I turned on the TV and I saw something about Mount Everest. And by the time I was done watching that, at the end of that, I said, you know what? One day I'm going to climb that mountain. Then out of sight, out of mind for many years, I'm sitting on my couch in Denver, Colorado, watching some random daytime television, nothing to do with mountaineering, nothing to do with climbing, nothing to do with anything athletic. I have no idea what I was watching, but for some stupid reason, that recollection and that childhood promise of climbing Everest popped back in my head. Yeah. So the next day, I started training. I started climbing the 14ers, which are the peaks here in Colorado. We have 53 of them that are above 14,000 feet. Started climbing them in the wintertime to get ready for the harsh conditions, but I had no idea what I was doing. And so, I went through this long, arduous process of learning how to do mountaineering properly, how to go through the process, because I figured if I couldn't keep a promise to myself, how could I keep my commitments to anyone else? So that's how the long journey started to go towards Everest. And then years down the road, I was standing on the summit of Denali in Alaska, which is the highest mountain in North America, and I was at 11:30 at night, me and just my climbing partner under that perpetual northern Alaska sun in the middle of the summertime. And I was just looking out over the beautiful Alaska range, and I said to myself, man, this is amazing. This is the most beautiful view I can imagine. coming through these eyeballs, but I can't just continue to do this just for personal reasons and for a promise. I've got to make something bigger out of this, and that's how the idea for the Quest series began. And and today here we are. We're talking about the Quest Everest and maybe the Quest Everest VR as well.
Yeah, and the thing is like, okay, so we're gonna definitely talk about the mountain itself being a quest, but in deciding to make just the journey, for a lot of people, what a lot of people may not realize is, and you really highlighted in this film, is before you even start talking about Everest, you need to basically climb other mountains. You literally have to start small before you get to the top. Like, this is really a process where it has to be a very methodical, very well thought out process. You know, you can't just get up and say, I'm gonna go and climb on Everest and go and do it. You know, you're not gonna just go to your local climbing club and just do a few minutes at the gym there, and then like, oh, I'm gonna go to Nepal, and like, no, it's a methodical. It takes years and years of like training, physical training, practice, like technical practice. Like you really gotta have the technique of mountain climbing down, because like one mistake is fatal. You know, one misstep and you are into a crevasse. Because there were a couple of scenes that was just like, no, absolutely not. Like when you guys are walking on the ladders, I said no, absolutely not. But just talk about just like the years of actually climbing other mountains within North America itself. Like just like having that fortitude and say, I'm going to do this regardless. And like, because it was like, it took you years.
Yeah, it took a long, long time, you know, and you're absolutely right. You take the baby steps, you know. When you don't know what the process is, you think, oh yeah, I'll just go to Mount Everest maybe next year or something. But no, at the end of the day, what you need to do, you need to learn about the techniques of mountain climbing. For example, crevasse travel. How you're going to walk across a snow field where there's big crevasses that you could fall into, and obviously that's a way you could lose your life, and it's a very dangerous situation. And you have those kind of scenarios. For example, on Mount Rainier, out in Washington, you have that scenario on Denali in Alaska for sure. You know, and then also, you know, the rope technique. How do you tie knots? How do you anchor yourself to the mountain? You know, how do you make sure to be self-sustainable for days on end by being able to boil water and to set up a tent, and, you know, to set up platforms, you know, in order to position your tent, and how to actually, you know, melt snow inside your tent, and these kind of things. And so you have the structural logistical stuff that you have to learn, but then you also have to get in physical condition. That, I played at the university level soccer or football here in the United States, and even at my best time, my quote unquote peak athletic ability, I was in much better shape when I went to Everest than when I played Division I college soccer here in the United States. So I knew that if you're going to go to Everest, you know, and as you work your way on these, you know, higher up on these altitudes of mountains, the one thing you didn't want to have a limiting factor, because you can't control a lot of things that happen there, is your physical preparation, right? So I was training 2 to 3 hours a day, 7 days a week. I didn't take one day off for a calendar year before I went to Everest. I stopped drinking, stopped doing anything that could possibly hinder me any kind of bit whatsoever physically for the mountain. And, you know, I got into this 7-day-a-week routine like a professional athlete would, you know, like it was a job. And then, of course, you have to have the mental preparation too, you know, to be able to take the cold, the hypoxic situation that you'd be dealing with, and so on. But the X factor that you can't train for is your genetics, because you're either born with ability to go to extremely high altitude like Everest, which is 29,032 feet or 8,849 meters. To get to that altitude, it has nothing to do ultimately at the end of the day, or should I say the biggest mitigating factor on whether or not you can make it up there, even if you're a highly trained athlete, you're mentally tough, is your genetics. Will your body allow you to acclimatize and produce more red blood cells and be able to survive and coexist and be athletically capable at those altitudes? And that you don't know until you go. And so that's one of the big X factors that you don't know. And, you know, you see it on these Everest expeditions, saw it on our expedition, you know, everyone, there's a type A kind of person, everyone's well trained, but you have Olympic athletes, you have ultra marathon runners, you have people that are phenomenal athletes, and some of them can't get above 19,000 feet, 18,000 feet, 21,000 feet, because the genetics won't allow it, even to the degree where you might have to get helicopter evacuated off the mountain, otherwise you might die within hours. So it's one of these crazy things that you don't know until you go to these extreme altitudes, but you can only do the best preparation that you think is possible at that time, and then you have to take that gamble.
Yeah, because in the film, you're one of your camera operators, Alex. I think it's Alex Harz. He had to turn back. It was just like, well, I did the best I could. I went as high as I could, and this is it. It's like, and that's the thing. Like, you have to, and I think also the other thing is that you have to learn to tap out. You have to learn to say, this is my limit, and this is as far as my body will allow to go. Because at the end of the day, like, it's not worth dying for. And when I say that, it's like, yes, there are accidents. There are people who die with regards to like in the film. Like, you also take time to talk about the 16 Sherpas who were killed in 2014 when like one of the ice falls collapsed, and and those things happen, and someone might slip and they may fall, or like an earthquake like the one in 2015, I believe. Those are events that happen. But then there's also like people who like they put their pride above their own well-being, and like they'll be like, I'm gonna do it regard, and it's just like, time out, like, listen to your body, because at the end of the day, what does that do? You don't even get to enjoy the accomplishment if you're dead.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's called summit fever, right? On a mountain like Mount Everest, you're surrounded by nothing but type A people, right? Highly trained, highly motivated. A lot of people have been prepared their whole life for this, and this is their, ultimate dream. And so there's oftentimes not anybody there to tell you, look, I don't think you're going to make it. We should turn around. You're not looking good. You're not meeting the benchmarks, with regards to timetables on where you need to be on the mountain at this point of time given to the oxygen tanks that you have with you, and so on. For example, on the summit push, and so that's a difficult thing, to tell somebody to turn around when that person that's telling you to turn around might not even tell themselves that, because again, their personality, and again, how highly motivated, driven, and physically prepared they are. So yeah, it's a tough balance, and to make it to the summit of Everest, you have to go 20% harder than anything you've ever done before in your life, including, playing top professional sports or top collegiate sports. But that 20% is the difference between making it to the top and back down, but it's also the difference on maybe not making it down at all, because you've pushed yourself 20% harder than your body will allow it, and then all of a sudden you run out of adrenaline, you run out of energy, you might run out of oxygen because you used up too much of it, and then you become 341. I mean, there's 340 people that have died on Everest. So it's one of those things that it's a very fine balance, as thin as a strand of hair.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Another thing about Mount Everest and just nature in general, it reminds us of how fragile the human body is. Like, our bodies are so fragile.
Yeah.
Like, we're susceptible to like nature will just like very quickly remind us, like, you are in nature's domain. Like, you are at the bottom of the food chain here. Like, you are inconsequential to nature. And like and that's something like the Sherpas, like, that's. And the people of Nepal, they respect nature and they respect the mountain, like Chumuluma, like, she is goddess of Mother Earth, and like they pay respects to that mountain because they're like, we as humans, we are nothing in comparison to the weather, to the climate, to the mountain itself. And watching the film, it kind of also reminded me, there's another film that I did an interview for, another documentary. It's about Jessie Lou. She's a champion free diver, and like, climbing to Mount Everest is the same thing as free diving. The only thing is you're going up, but for free diving you're going down. But it's the same mind over matter. Like, one of her in speaking to Jessie, like, one of her things that she's still struggling with as an athlete is like listening to her body and listening to when her body is saying you've reached your limit. And like, and there's no shame in like reaching your limit, because the human body is only capable of only so much. Like, there's nothing to be ashamed of like what your body is saying. You can't go like 120% when your body's only capable of 105.
That's right.
50%. And like, for her also, like, the other similarities to this is like the acclimation process is like, you got to go up, come back down, go up, come back down, and it's a gradual, slow incline. You don't just shoot to the top and like say, but it's like days and weeks and even months of like up, come down. You go another like 20 feet higher, come down. Next day, 30 feet higher, come down. Like, it's like process. And for free divers, it's the same process. Each dive, they test their endurance and they train their body to go further and further and further with each successive dive. But there's only you can only go so far before the depths of the ocean crushes your body and your soul. And it's the same with altitude, because your red blood cells would be like, we will burst if you try to go any further.
Yeah, you know, and it's interesting because I'm a scuba diver as well, and so it's an inverse thing to do with pressure. I mean, mountaineering and scuba diving are very similar that way. You know, in diving, it's too much pressure, and mountaineering, there's not enough pressure, but both have that physiological effect on your body that has to do with oxygen and how your body responds, you know, to the lack of pressure or too much pressure. And so, yeah, they have quite a few similarities, and also, like you said, the mental toughness to overcome, but to also understand how far can I go, how much is too much, right? And the thing on Everest is, you know, getting to the summit is optional, getting back down is mandatory, you know, and that's what people have to always remember, that okay, the mountain will always be here. It's not going anywhere. So if you have the opportunity to come back and try again, okay, maybe you do, but if you don't make it back home to your family, then that's the end of it. So.
Right. Yeah. And you gotta like take even the failure as a learning process. You know, like if you come back down, you can say, okay, you know what, this was the mistake I made this time. I know what to correct for the next time. But if people don't take that approach, they're not gonna have an opportunity to rectify their mistakes. You know, and that's really a lesson in life in general. You know, like take your mistakes and the failures as a learning experience, and rather in trying to just go full on and failing completely and never having the opportunity to rectify it. And then another test of endurance is regards to film. The film itself is filmmaking. It's a test of endurance, you know, you got to do raising funds and everything. So talk to me about this, the process of deciding I'm going to make a film, but then also getting the funds, the support, and the like. You got to go through like the licenses, not only just to climb the mountain, but you also need license to film, you know, and all that. So talk to me about that, because you got to do all of these steps before you even get to Mount Everest itself.
Yeah, you know, normally in the filmmaking process, the shortest part of the process is actually the filming, you know, so that's the shortest process of the main 4 phases, which is the pre-production and the filming itself, and then the editing, and then actually the distribution. And the shortest phase most of the time is actually the filming. And on Everest, it can be, you know, okay, that can be a little bit different because it took us 52 days to climb the mountain, so that's a long filming schedule, for example, if you're just going out on a shoot. But yeah, there's a lot of preparation outside of the physical preparation that I had to do, putting the team together, getting the permits from Nepal. You know, you have to get a summit permit to even climb the mountain. Then you have to have all the camera gear, have your team come over there, you know, because we also had, you know, multiple cameras that we filmed. We filmed with 9 cameras total, you know, so as we were going higher on the mountain, that had to change. And of course, the logistics and the difficulty of filming on one of the most extreme environments in the world is its own challenge. But putting the whole project together is a thing where you have to say, okay, now here's the concept, here's the idea, here's what we want to do, right? We want to go climb the mountain, but we want to be able to tell the story of the Sherpa people, of the religious significance of the mountain to Nepal, to what is, you know, Kathmandu like, what is the Khumbu Valley like, what is the stuff that you normally wouldn't see in a movie that talks about Mount Everest. That was the main focus of this movie. It wasn't about me climbing Mount Everest as much as it was me just being the conduit to the information that the audience gets to see, i.e. the interviews with the Sherpa, with the, you know, the Hindu sadhus down in Kathmandu, or the monk at Kopan Monastery, and these kind of things. That in its own right, getting the permission to film in those areas, you know, is very challenging because you're dealing with foreign governments, you're dealing with foreign agencies that aren't the same here, for example, in the United States and Canada, where it's all regimented with film permits and so on. That's not the case. So you have to have contacts on the ground that can get you access to these locations to then allow you to film there. And even in the Khumbu Valley, because it took 9 days to trek to base camp, right? It's not just, oh, you end up at base camp, it takes 9 days to trek there, you know, to film in all those different locations. You have to get permission from the monks to be able to film them and so on. So there's a lot of those logistics that people don't understand, but that's also why a film credit roll typically is so long, because there's so many moving parts that have to be brought together in order to make that final product something that people can see. So yeah, we had a lot of that stuff that we had to do. And it was also ever evolving. It's, you know, there's a lot of improving that goes on, because in environments in countries like Nepal, or environments in the Khumbu Valley or Mount Everest, you can't stage the shots like you can, you know, for example, here or in Canada, where you could block off a street, pay a police officer $100 an hour, you know, to do traffic control. You can't do that over there. It's not going to happen. So there's a lot of, you know, improvising on being able to deal with the situation that you're dealt with, and then trying to get those those shots and being able to get the footage that you want. And on Everest, it's even more so. You're not going to be able to stage those shots at all. You're trying to survive and climb a mountain. So you know, oftentimes it's you get what you get, and then you deal with it in editing. So yeah, it's a very interesting, dynamic place to film at, for sure.
Yeah, and I really appreciated that aspect of the film about how you took the time to show Nepal and Kathmandu. You know, you showed like the funeral pyre, which is part of the Hindu culture, where someone dies, like they go to the bank of the river and they perform a cremation service. Now, you know, and like that's important because again, like the film is very much, I think, also talking about life and death. And like again, as I mentioned, like the human body is fragile, you know, and like death is a constant in our lives. Like we live to die. And like, you know, when you think about it, like we live today, we're not immortal. But like you show like the aspects of living in Kathmandu and like the life that these people have, like how they take time to enjoy life, you know, and enjoy and be spiritual and they have their religions and their spiritual beliefs and their spiritual practices. But they also take the time to enjoy life because I think because where they're located, because they are so close to the mountain and like they know how dangerous the mountain is, and not just Everest, but the surrounding mountains as well. But the environment itself is very dangerous. You know, like they're on like Nepal sits on a fault line, so you know like earthquakes are common. You know, and like they understand like the fragility of life. So like they take the time to enjoy it. So like I like that you showed both the living and the death aspect of like the culture in Nepal and in Kathmandu, you know, and so, but talk to me a bit about that, because I thought it was interesting that because it was recommended to you by one of the guides there, like he said just sit there and go watch the cremation ceremony. So talk to me about that, about just having that experience of sitting and watch it, because in North America, like cremation services aren't done publicly. Like you might like a body would be taken to a crematorium and it would be burned in the crematorium, and then like they will bring out the urn, you know. And like I know in some other cultures, like in Korea, like cremation is very common in Korean culture, and like they see the bodies going into the fire pit itself. Like that's part of their process. You see the body and you actually stand and watch it being taken out, and you watch and the urn is brought out. Whereas in North America, that's not thing. Like, you know, it's a very contained environment, and we're accustomed to the burial process where we see the bodies get laid into the ground, and it's the same thing in the Caribbean. Like that's part of our process. But so what was it like for you to actually see the cremation process and then watch them actually take the ashes into the river?
Yeah, you know, it's a very mind-opening experience. You know, you sit there to cremate a body, you know, the old school way, you know, almost like Game of Thrones style on a fire. Yeah, it takes 2 to 4 hours, you know, so it takes a long time just for the fire to completely break down the body. And then the ritual aspect of people and the loved ones getting ready to, you know, do the cremation. You know, we cover all that as you see in the Quest Everest. You know, it's powerful because you're watching, you know, the loved ones come together. And they're preparing the body for this long process of the cremation, and it's 24/7. You know, we're talking about Pashupatinath Temple specifically in the movie. That's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week that it's open and available on these stone slabs. They're called ghats, where they cremate these bodies. And so you stare at it, and it's like this, like you said, this is nothing you would experience in North America and pretty much anywhere in the West. So it really takes you for a moment to adjust to it. And then, you know, just the smell of the campfire and so on, that's actually human bodies burning. And then to see the ashes being pushed into the Bagmati River. And the reason why they do that is the Bagmati River connects to the Ganges River, and the Ganges River is the most holy river in Hinduism. And so therefore, you know, it's a direct tributary that heads downstream into the Ganges, and that's why they do that there, because it's a spiritual river. It's a river of passage, you know, into the next cycle of life. And so it's very, very powerful. I mean, you know, you just get absolutely enthralled and you know, really almost spiritually engaged in something that you might not normally think you would be, even if you're not even a spiritual person. There's no way that you could sit there for the amount of hours, 6 to 8 hours that we were there at Pashupatinath filming and interviewing the sadhus and watching the cremations and stuff. There's no way that can't affect you. There's no way that it can't touch you to some degree here. And yeah, and then by the time we got back to the hotel, I said to one of my cameramen, you know, our clothes are smelling like campfire, and I said, you know what? We smell like fire, but that's from human bodies burning all day long. And so just to think about that is an interesting premise in its own right, versus sitting by the campfire with marshmallows and therefore afterwards you've got some smell of smoke in your clothes. So yeah, it's extremely powerful, and it puts everything in perspective into how you said how small we are, compared to the universe and compared to nature, and ultimately how insignificant we are, but to have that ability to present, a passage, rite of passage into the afterlife, and then, in the Hindu perspective, the rebirth aspect of it, potentially as well, is very, very powerful.
Yeah, and the thing is, you mentioned like smelling campfire, but the other thing is like human body, burning a human body when it's burned has a very distinct smell because of like all the fats and chemicals and staying in our body. Because I unfortunately had an experience of knowing what that smells. Because in Barbados, there's crematoriums just for people who want cremation process, but in our hospital, right in the basement of our hospital, there is an area where like you have, if someone has an amputation or whatever, like they burn, that's how they dispose of the body parts that have been removed from people during surgery, and they're burned. And I know because I used to do some work for a lab in a lab, so I had to go down to the basement and I smelled it and I felt and because it has a very distinct smell, right? And you don't know exactly what it is you're smelling. And like the person that was working, he's like, oh, that's the smell of human body burning. I was like, he's like, it smells like, again, like a campfire, but not quite. It has a kind of acerbic, acidic like thing that sits in your throat. So and so you talk about like having that experience and like saying to yourself, oh, I smell like this, but the reason I smell this is because of a cremation ceremony. Like we talked a bit about you preparing yourself physically and mentally for the journey and for the trek. But you probably weren't thinking about the spiritual necessity and preparing yourself spiritually for this quest, And so talk to me about how that experience kind of prepared you for the spiritual aspect of it, because again, spirituality and Buddhism and particularly the type of, but I can't remember the name, but practice in Tibet and in Nepal is very specific, and it's very specific to how they approach the mountain, because they don't let you attempt to climb the mountain without taking part in a puja, which is like a sacred ceremony, like to prayer to the mountain and to pray for safety and for guidance. Like and then you also met a monk, and then you also met a Hindu holy man, and then you had to get like a prayer from a lama. So talk to me just about taking these steps, these probably unthought of steps about like the spiritual aspect of preparing yourself for the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And the first spiritual engagement that I had was with the Hindu sadhus, which are basically holy wise men. And, in that Pashupatinath temple where they were doing the cremations that you see in the film, they actually live on the temple grounds in the caves there. They've given away all material aspects of life, and they live literally on the temple grounds. They've denounced everything that has to do with the material world, and they've given themselves completely to the Hindu process of spirituality. So interviewing them was very important, because they really talk to you about being grounded and being a good person, within the universe itself. And that's very important, because as you're going along, meeting more and more people throughout this process of climbing the mountain and the filming that we did in Kathmandu, it kind of puts you in that right mindset of dealing with people in a completely different culture that might speak a completely different language, and also look completely different from you. But it also reaffirmed my strong belief that I've had a long time, and that there's only two kinds of people on this planet. It doesn't matter what religion you believe in. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter what country you come from. It doesn't matter what language you speak or what job you may or may not have. There's only two kinds of people. You're either a good person or a bad person. And you can see that inherently across all cultures. And you can get that strong feeling just in your gut, when you see people and you see the engagement and how they interact with the environment stuff, whether or not these people are good people or bad people. And so when you take that mindset that I have and you get put in that situation, it becomes very engaging, because now it's easier to understand, okay, this is why he believes this. This is why he thinks I should feel this way spiritually, and to prepare himself for the climb. Then the next step, we went to Kopan Monastery and met a Buddhist monk himself. And, that's very interesting because, again, the direct correlation to how the mountain is spiritually attached to the Nepali people, but also to the Sherpa people and to the Buddhists, that live in Nepal. Like you mentioned earlier on, it's known as Choma Lungma, Choma Mia Lungsama, to the Sherpa people and to the Tibetan people, which means Goddess Mother of the world. And they really, really believe that. Where we have, when you say, oh, what's Mother Earth and so on, we have this vague construct, oh, it's the sky and it's the weather and it's these kind of things. Yeah, but not to the Sherpa people. It is Mount Everest. And so that is the representation of the Goddess Mother of the world, or Goddess Mother of Earth. And so when you stand at the base of it, when you get to base camp, you're absolutely right. You have to pay homage to it, ask permission for it, and also guidance for safe passage before you're even allowed to step foot into the Khumbu Icefall, which is the start of the climb up Everest or up Choma Lungma. And so when you're going along that process from Kathmandu up into the Khumbu Valley, and you're seeing all the Sherpa, tributes to Buddhism and to the Bon mysticism of their past, you see that it just starts to seep into you, because every village, every, say 500 meters along the trek, you see this element of this, Buddhism that they practice up there. And so it's just around you all day, every day, from the prayer flags to the wheels, and to the monasteries and so on, and all the major settlements up there. It's a very, very powerful, and over time, just through your presence there, it starts to seep into you, to the point that as you're going higher on the mountain, and the more time that I spent with my climbing partner that I ultimately stood on the summit with, Tashi, who was a Buddhist monk himself, there is no way it can't affect you. And I won't give it away, but you see in the film how it affected me specifically, at a very, very critical time in the movie. And it wasn't, something that I was cognizant of, but it just overcame me, in the moment. And, and coming back from Everest now, you see life in a different way. Because things that you thought were so significant, the Amazon guy didn't deliver his package today, or the trash people didn't come because of the holiday, or some of these things that are pretty meaningless when you think about it from a global perspective, but it's significant to us here in the West because of the position that we're in. Those things don't quite hold as much value anymore as things do after coming back from a place like Mount Everest and being engaged so spiritually with the people and the culture there that surround the mountain itself.
No, and I get it completely, because I'm Christian, I believe in God, and one of the things that affirmed my belief in just a higher being, as people say, and that there is something bigger for us is and I grew up that way, grew up in the church and everything, but I love the ocean, as you can see from my picture. I love the ocean. I call it my happy place. Being in the sea is my happy place. And I used to go snorkeling and everything, and so I would see the fish and the coral reefs and everything. And at one point in my life, I wanted to be a marine biologist, and I love the ocean. But I used to work there's a outpost in Barbados it belongs to McGill University in Montreal, and it's an outpost where geologists, marine biologists, biologists, people who study natural the natural sciences was come there, and it would be students, and they will stay there and to tour around the country, and study the environment and ecology and stuff. But I would talk to them and everything. But I remember I wanted to get my PADI license to be a scuba diver. Didn't get it because it's very expensive. But I did go scuba diving a few times. I did manage to go scuba diving a few times, and being able to see the fish that far down. I think the furthest I got was about 40 feet or something like that. But it was for me, it was very affirming. You see how all of these hundreds of species of fish and the coral, and the sea life and everything. And you look up from the depth, you look up, and all you're seeing is darkness, But then you just see a little beam of light, and then you think to yourself, wait, this. You just think to yourself, this was created, this doesn't happen by accident, And I believe also in adaptation. I'm this does not just happen like that. you know, and like those, and I think for a lot of people who, like, as you said, like for people who like you who climb to Mount Everest, you're able to realize and say, this, like, we are just like a speck, you know, like this earth that we live in, this universe that we live in is grand, and it's like, and it's all consuming, you know, like for, like you mentioned, like Tashi, sorry, and the other Sherpas, I want to name them, like there was Nagwang Tashi Sherpa, who's one of the trekking guys, you know, and then there is Punja Lama, who's one of the female guys on the mountain, you know, and Laparita Sherpa. Like these people, like they have such a intense love and respect for the environment and for nature and for the mountains, you know, and a lot of that comes because they see that they are, and I don't want to say inconsequential, but they realize that I have to realize that I am just a part of a greater whole, you know, and I think that's something that anyone that goes through these kind of experiences realizes, like it kind of removes, like, not selfishness completely, but reminds you like there are other things bigger than us, you know, we are just a sum of a part of
That's totally true. And Lakbarita is a perfect example of that, who we interview in the movie. He's a legend on Everest. He's climbed Everest 17 times. And he's an absolute icon on the mountain. And was sitting down and interviewing him and actually becoming friends with him now is a complete honor. I mean, and he recounts about what it was like for the first time that he tried to summit Everest, you know, and how that affected him spiritually versus how it's affected him moving forward. And so, yeah, it's very powerful, you know, again, because they put themselves in that position of where they are within the universe and within the relevance within the universe, as well as the relevance to, for example, Chomolungma, the mountain itself. So yeah, it is extremely powerful, and it just, like I said before, it just rubs off on you. You know, you just can't avoid having some sense of feeling about it, having some engagement with it. It's extremely powerful, and you know, you're right. These kind of experiences definitely bring those out, you know, in humans, I think, oftentimes because it's something you normally maybe not every day think about, right, until you're put in those situations.
Yeah, and I think that's something that every human person, if possible, should be able to get to experience at least once in their life. Because again, I always say, like, this universe is far too vast. Vast for just us to be it, you know. Like, I do believe in like, we are not alone. So mind the words of X-Files, you know. Like, I'm a huge fan of sci-fi and X-Files and stuff, because I don't believe we can't be all there is, you know. We can't be the only intelligent life in this grand universe. So, but like your film, I think for me, one of the things I really did take away from it is, like, even if you never get to climb Mount Everest, and there's only a small percentage of people who will ever get to do it, like, there's some great event in your life that should help to reaffirm not only your place in the universe, but also who you are as a person. You say, you know, like, I do serve a purpose. I have a purpose, you know, I can do something to help other people, you know, and like, and that's something that I hope that everyone gets a chance, and it can just be achieving a goal, you know, whatever goal, or as Pooja put it, she said, not even a goal, she said a dream. Because she said, like, have a dream and make that dream come true. You know, and I kind of like that she made that differentiation between having a goal and having a dream. You know,
that's exactly right. You know, I break it down to having your own personal Everest. It's not about having to climb Mount Everest, but it's finding your own personal Everest as your dream, as your goal, and then making that happen. And then taking every single step, you know, to make that dream a reality. And I think if people are willing to establish something like a personal Everest to them, and to go, you know, that discipline and that dedication and the amount of commitment it takes to make that happen, then you've achieved exactly the purpose that you set out to do, like, you know, Funza said. And so, yeah, I agree. You didn't have to be climbing this mountain right here, where, you know, this is from the summit. It has to be with you finding purpose, finding a dream, and then trying to do the best to achieve that. And I think that will bring people a lot of fulfillment in their own right. And also, on the same token, you know, find themselves out who they really are, you know, and possibly in how it relates to their place within the universe, depending on their disposition spiritually and so on. So, yeah.
And now talk to me about the mountain itself. Like, we talked a bit about how it's a constant climbing. Like, you don't just go straight up on one shot in, like, or maybe like 2 or 3 days. It's not just 2 or 3 days of climbing. It's like days and weeks of climbing, because you have to acclimate. So talk to me about, we've talked a bit about the the joy, you know, the revelations. And talk to me about the frustrations. No, just about the frustrating aspects, because just the thought of like, like you're building your endurance, you're acclimating to the air, to the thinness of the air, you're acclimating to the coldness, to the air pressure and everything. But it has to be extremely frustrating. You know,
Absolutely.
just like for us as human beings, like we don't like having to do things repetitively. You know, like as you said, like you prepared yourself physically, going to the gym and all of this. You said it was a 7-day, like almost like a job for you. There's that. And then like for athletes, for instance, who prepare for the Olympics, they do it, they get to the Olympics, they run their meet, they do that sporting event, you know, like, and then it's done.
Yeah.
It can be done within a day. They train for years for a day, but your training, and then you get to the mountain and you're still training. You know, like your expedition guide, Bright Waters, like you're professional climbers, but he's still making sure that you guys practice the rappelling, you know, and like walking on the ladders, and that you know which carabiners to use, you know, like they're still refreshing your mind constantly in the process. So just talk to me about just that, the repetitive aspects and the frustrations. You'd be like, you're like, I have to get up and do this again today.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because you're right. Usually, from an athletic perspective, you train for the event, and then the event's done. Well, in Everest, you're training, and then you trek 9 days to base camp to even start the event. And then when you're there, you have to be able to be familiar with what your training has taught you over the years in order to take place in that event, because there's no place in the world that you would ever climb through the Khumbu Icefall. Nowhere in the world would you climb an icefall like that to get to the summit of a mountain, except for on Mount Everest. And the only reason why you do that is because if you want to get to the summit of Mount Everest, you have to go through this obstacle, because if you want to stand on the highest point on Earth, that's something you have to do. So it's kind of it's almost such a crazy concept, you know, to the point when the first bit of frustration, I think, really sets in when you first step foot in that ice fall, because you have all this idea of, okay, this is my training taught me this, and this is what I've known from other mountains and so on. You can throw it all out the window. You right away have to give yourself up to the mountain, and if you don't, you might as well turn around, because it's just a game of Russian roulette. The Khumbu Icefall, which is the highest, you know, sits on the world's highest glacier, moving downhill between 3 to 6 feet a day, so it's constantly shifting like this. And so every time you go through the icefall, you never go through it the same way. The route gets knocked down because of the avalanches or the seracs falling over, collapsing the ladders into the crevasses and all different scenarios. But then you have to constantly make those adjustments. And so when you get to the first ladder crossing, and I saw this on our expedition, you have guys that are world-class athletes, and they get to that ladder and they're looking down a 1,000-foot crack into the earth, and they're standing on a Home Depot style ladder that's swaying up and down like this because it's tied together with fishing string, you know, and you only have about this much space on the front of your boots and your back of your boots, which are crampons that, you know, stick into the ice to actually have traction on that ladder. So it's a very unstable situation. And so you see people that get to that first ladder crossing and they start to shake like this, you know, and they start to freeze up like deer in headlights, and then they just turn around, and that's the end of it. So they may have
There's
trained.
nothing wrong with turning around.
There's nothing wrong, but it's one of those things you can't prepare for. So that's a frustrating thing, right? Especially if you're an athlete that likes to have routine. I prepare, I do this every single day, you know, like clockwork. And then you get to a situation that you're not prepared for, because there's no other place in the world where you do this at. And so then, bam, that could ruin your whole event right there, as they say. The next thing is then, you know, like you talked about, is one of my pet peeves. When I climb mountains, I hate losing altitude, because you work so hard to gain that altitude. To come back down is so frustrating. But like you said, climbing Mount Everest is a process. You have to go up. For example, the first time you go into the ice fall, you're just getting into the ice fall. You go maybe a quarter of a way. Then you go up and you go about half the way. You're getting used to the environment, right? What is it like to be in the Khumbu ice fall? What is it like to travel through the deadliest 2 miles on Earth, as they say? You know, and how do you deal with those scenarios of this ever-shifting environment? Then you go back up from base camp up to try to make it through the ice fall to Camp 1. And when you get to Camp 1 at about 19,700 feet, you stay up there for a day or up to 3 days to acclimatize that altitude, and to maybe push your way halfway or all the way to Camp 2, you know, and that is also moving gear, equipment, but mainly to acclimatize, to get your body used to what 19,700 feet feels like, or 21,000 feet, what Camp 2 sits at. Well, then we came all the way back down through the ice fall, and like, got to do this again. You have to gear up, motivate to go up again, and then so you go up again, and then we went up to Camp 2. Then when we got to Camp 2, we spent a day to acclimatize, and then the following day after that, we would go up that steep startup process up the steep Lhotse face, which is a 5,000-foot wall of ice that connects Camp 2 to Camp 4, and the goal is to reach Camp 3, which is about 23,500, 23,600 feet, sitting on this slab of steep ice. There's a little bit of an area that's kind of ledged out, and that's where you stop and you have lunch and you take in some water and you acclimatize. And the reason why you stop there, not go any higher before you go for the summit, is because the body can no longer produce any more red blood cells above that altitude, so it's no point of going any higher until you go for the summit. So you go all the way back down to base camp, and then now you wait. And now you're waiting for different reasons. The reason why you go for the summit when you do, it's always in May every year, and it's because it has nothing to do with, necessarily your physical position and how you acclimatize the body. Yes, that's important, but the ultimate deciding factor is it has to do with the monsoons that start to develop every year around that time in May, off the coast of India and off the coast of Bangladesh, and they push up into the Himalayas. And what those monsoon winds do and those pressure systems, it moves the jet stream that actually flies right over the summit of Everest. It moves it off the summit of Everest just enough to give you that little window of opportunity to try to make it to the summit. Because right now, the wind speeds on Everest, as we're sitting here talking right now, could be over 100 miles an hour, and you're not going up there. So, but when the monsoons push that off, it opens up the window every year, the beginning of May, somewhere around the 9th, all the way up to about the 27th. And every year it varies. It could be 1 day, it could be 3 days, it could be 10 days, it could be non-consecutive days. You just don't know. Every year it's different. And so when that time comes, and it's a projection, it's not a weather prediction. It's not like, a weatherman says, today it's 72 degrees and sunny, perfect day to go out and climb Mount Everest. No, the way it works is it has to do with the global trade winds and the pressure systems that are going around the earth, and specifically as it relates to the monsoons, that we actually got our projections from Belgium. Nowhere close to the mountain, thousands of miles away. But this guy was an expert on dealing with, global weather patterns. And he said, okay, I think this day, by the time you get there to stage for the summit, because again, it takes time to go up the mountain, that I think that you will have a window to try to make it to the summit. Then you make that guess. You hope that it's the right guess. Then when you start to stage for the summit, hopefully you got there at the right time, and then either make it, you don't make it, you get up there, you come back down, or unfortunately, oftentimes you might not make it at all. So, so it's one of those things that you just got to give yourself up to the mountain. You have to be able to open up to Chomolungma and let her dictate on whether or not you're going to make it up to the top or not. Otherwise, you might as well forget about it.
And so tell me about doing this journey with your climbing team, because you have Ryan Waters, who is the expedition leader. You have Gilberto Toen, who's from Brazil, Gunnar Tambat from Turkey. I didn't catch the name of the person from Norway, but you have them. Yes, and you also had, I think most importantly, Tashi Sherpa, who is the mountain guide by the Sadar, who's the person who's in charge of basically the whole thing. Like, everyone has to listen to him. Like, if he says we don't go, you guys don't go. So talk to me about your team and forming your team and like finding Tashi and working with everyone, because it is an effort. You can't climb Everest alone.
Yeah, right. It is totally a team effort, and we talk about that in the film. So I had two teams that I kind of had to deal with. One was my filming team, and that team got smaller as we went higher. Most of the people that were on the filming team, or some of those people, didn't go any higher than base camp because they weren't trained to be mountaineers, and unfortunately, the biggest limiting factor of being able to do a documentary on Mount Everest is being able to climb the mountain. So therefore, that eliminates 99.9% of the people that would normally pick up a camera to film something. So yeah, so those members of the team didn't go any higher. Then from the climbing perspective, we knew, okay, we're going to climb the mountain. So yeah, we had Gilberto from Brazil and Erlen from Norway and Gulner from Turkey. Those are my other 3 climbing teammates. Then Ryan and Tashi and I, Ryan being the expedition leader and Tashi being the head Sirdar or the head Sherpa mountain guide, us 3 were the ones that were filming the rest of the way because we were going to try to go for the summit. So therefore, that's why we had the cameras to film what you see in the movie itself, above the icefall, for example. And then on top of that, I also had a virtual reality camera with me, which we haven't mentioned anything about yet, but I filmed the whole thing in virtual reality, which is the only first-person virtual reality sent to Mount Everest, because I thought, well, if I'm here climbing anyway to tell this documentary on a 2D perspective, why don't I do something that might be completely crazy as well, and let's film this all in virtual reality because it's most likely a one-and-done deal. And I'm a big fan of video games, first-person shooters, so I'm like, well, if I could put someone in my shoes, like in a video game, that would be the closest possible experience of what it's like to climb Everest without being dumb enough to get off the couch to try it yourself.
Is that the one that's on the pole? I was going to ask about, because I was going to ask about the technical, but that's the one that was on the pole, right?
That's right. And so the good thing about it is that we can see both of those films. If you go to thequesteverest.com, you can see the links of how you can watch the 2D film and also how you can experience the VR film as well. So, they kind of are a combo. So you get to watch over the course of 97 minutes, the 2D film, not put on your Meta headset or scroll your mouse around on the computer screen and see what it's like to climb the mountain in first person perspective, like a video game with me. So we had, those different elements. So now you're talking about the climbing team, which, we had Tashi and we had, my 3 teammates that were there to climb the mountain and Ryan, the expedition leader, but we also had Mingma and Mingmar, and Pasan that were also part of the climbing team, the Sherpas that were there to climb along with us. And it is really a team effort as you work your way up to the different camps and as you work your way higher on the mountain. And the way it ultimately turned out wasn't the way I ever planned it. And again, I could have predicted and planned this thing 1,000 times till Sunday, and it would never turned out the way it did. So it was one of those things, maybe from a spiritual perspective, was just meant to be, And so as we were going higher on the mountain and we're filming stuff and climbing and making our way up there, when we got to South Col, which is Camp 4, which is the highest point on the mountain where you get ready to go for the summit at 26,000 feet or 8,000 meters, we were already climbing that day from Camp 3 up to Camp 4. So we didn't actually take a rest day after we went all the way up that steep Lhotse face from Camp 3 to Camp 4. We just got into our tents, got a little bit of water in us, got a couple scoops of dehydrated food, that you mix with water like an MRE, and then we had to go back out and get ready to go around midnight to go for the summit, because you want to try to time it that when you go for the summit that you get back down in daylight, and so that process of getting to the summit and back, you want to try to do it in the middle of the night to start out with, so when you get back, you ultimately get back to Camp 4 during the day. Well, what happened in our perspective, Ryan and I led out from Camp 3. We were the first to leave our tents, from Camp 4, to leave our tents and go up this steep face of the mountain that you see in the film called the Triangular Face. And him and I were leading hour after hour after hour after hour, and just like a metronome, one step in the dark with your headlights. And then, so I didn't know exactly where Tashi or Mingmar or Golner or Gilberto or Erlen were behind me. I just was focused on following basically Ryan's heels and going up the mountain. We got to a place called the Balcony, and the Balcony is, on the border of Nepal and Tibet. It's actually the southeast ridge that takes you on the summit ridge to the top of the mountain, actually sits on the border between China or Tibet and Nepal. So on one side, on your left shoulder as you're going up, is Nepal. On the right side is Tibet. And the Balcony is that place where you first meet the southeast ridge. And it's also kind of a litmus test. You try to get to the Balcony at a certain point in time with enough oxygen in order to say, okay, I can calculate that under this amount of oxygen flow that I'm using, I can try to get to the summit and back down. And if you can't by the time you get there, that's one of those places where you need to tap yourself on the shoulder, or someone needs to tap you on the shoulder shoulder, say, look, you need to head back down because you're not keeping up with the different points that you need to achieve at certain points in time in order to try to make it back down with oxygen still left, in your regulator, or enough daylight to try to get back down. So when we got there, Ryan and I sat down. We had a drink of water, that the water the liter of water that I had with me, or the 2 liters of water that I had with me, and we sat there and we waited to see what the rest of the team was doing. And Tashi and Ryan got onto the radio and said, "Okay, we're here below, the balcony, Goldner and so on. We're on our way up here." And so Ryan went over to me and he said, "Look, Alex, I think just start heading up the Southeast Ridge by yourself. I think you can make it to the summit. I'm going to wait here for the rest of the team. And when Mingma gets up here, I'll send him up after you, and you just stop and periodically check back to see when Mingma's coming, and then when you see Mingma, start to slow down and wait for him, and then you and Mingma go for the summit." Well, I was going up the Southeast Ridge for the first time in my life by myself. I would turn around, I wouldn't see Mingma, and the reason why I would know that I would see Mingma is because he had this bright, big bird outfit on, this big yellow climbing suit that you can't miss. You can see from the distance. And I'm going, and I didn't see Mingma, and I said, "Where's Mingma?" And I do I stop? Do I keep going? What do I do? And I just slowly kept going, and finally I saw this blue and black suit come up, and I was like, "Well, that's Tashi." And so then Tashi was actually, and I didn't know the scenario because I had no communication with Ryan and the rest of the team. Well, what happened was Ryan sent Tashi up to follow me, and he kept Mingma with the other guys. And so then I waited for Tashi to come up to me, and then Tashi and I would rotate every 200 feet or so up the rest of the way of the mountain, and we had the whole mountain to ourselves. And ironically, I gave Tashi a camera all the way back at Camp 1. And so it just worked out that Tashi ultimately turned out to be the guy that was with me. Otherwise, you wouldn't see a lot of the footage that you see in the movie because Mingma didn't have a camera. Tashi did. And it just turned out to be that Tashi was the one that went with me the rest of the way. And so, yeah, again, it's one of these things you can plan all day long, but it just turned out the way that it turned out. And, I'm humbly honored that it did turn out that way. And I came back down with 63 hours of 2D and virtual reality footage and 10 fingers and 10 toes. So,
yeah, because Tashi was able to get the actual shots of you actually coming up.
Yeah.
Right to the summit, because he's at the summit waiting for you, so he was able to turn back and get the shot of you there. So talk to me about just being able to share that moment, not just with yourself, but with someone, especially like Tashi, who has not only so much experience, but like who is the Sadar. I think it's very important to mention that, because he, as I said, is the person who would decide, like, if we don't go, we don't go. But for him to be the person to have that moment with you. And I kind of like the shot where you guys kind of like double the shot with Sir Hillary and Tenzin Norgay, who was the first people to top Mount Everest. Like, you kind of like double that shot where you got a shot with you and Tashi doing the same thing. Like, talk to me about sharing that moment with him, and and I think I think it's very important to, like, as I said, it's a team effort, but it's like you can't do these kind of events alone. And just be able to share that moment with someone, especially someone like Tashi.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting, ironic it turned out that way because Tashi was the one who picked me up in Kathmandu from the airport. So I met Tashi. He was the first person from the team that I met right away. And so Tashi and I bonded right away back in Kathmandu. We were there for several days before we even went up to the Khumbu to start trekking. You have to get your permit, your climbing permit, and all this kind of stuff takes time, and get all the logistics and bags ready to fly up to the Khumbu Valley and so on. So Tashi was the first guy that I met, and he also used to be a monk at the monastery that we filmed in the film, and it was his friend that I interviewed there who was still a monk there, and it's the reason why I got access to film there. Otherwise, you couldn't even get access to film there at all. And so Tashi and I bonded right away. And it was just so ironic, and as you see in the film, I interview him a lot during the trek. I talk about Tashi a lot. We talk about the earthquake, in 2015 and his experiences in the 2014 avalanche and all this kind of stuff that happened. prior and years past and so on. And so Tashi was very integral to the story itself. And it was just ironic that it turned out to be that Tashi was the one that I got to experience the whole upper mountain with. We literally had the whole mountain to ourselves. There was, nobody up there. And, we got to spend 45 minutes on the summit together by ourselves. And it was one of these, as they would say, maybe in the States, one of these bromances, where it was such a powerful moment because I understood, and he taught me so much about the Buddhism and the spirituality of Chomolungma during that long trekking process and during the climb and so on, that it was just, prophetic that would be him and I up there on the summit together, and to pay our respects to Chomolungma, to the goddess mother of the earth, to allow us, safe passage to the summit, and for it to be with him, who is so spiritually, vested in the mountain. It was just, absolutely special. We cried together, we hung out together, we got to share that moment together, and again, I couldn't have asked for anybody better to share that moment with me, to the point today he calls me, my brother from another mother father, because we are so bonded, not just by the mountain, but the spirituality, the experience, that's as if we were long lost children that got separated from orphanages, many years ago, and never knew that we existed as brothers, and that's how close we are today. And so, yeah, it was an absolutely life-changing experience. It's one that I'll never forget. It's almost like a wedding anniversary to me, because of how special that moment was, to be able to spend it, with Tashi at the top of the world.
And what day was that exactly? Because I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, it was May 21st. So May 21st is my Everest day. It's my anniversary day, And then when we got back to Kathmandu, Tashi and I went to the Everest Day. So every year what they have in Kathmandu is Everest Day, which is May 29th, which directly relates to, like, as you mentioned, with Tenzing Norgay and Sir Edmund Hillary, which was May 29th, 1953, was the first time Everest was climbed successfully. And so that's something that they honor every year in Kathmandu, and they call it Everest Day. And so it's a big day in Nepal. And of course, it's a very big day to the Sherpa people and to, of course, Everest climbers that go to Nepal. So Tashi and I got to spend that together as well. And that was a nice, ceremonial day to hang out with him and to reflect on the moment that we had 8 days prior on the summit of Everest.
And I think that's amazing. And I think something that I want you to touch on a bit, because it's mentioned, it's hinted at in the film, but it's not really explicitly said. But you also kind of mentioned it with regards to like the weather patterns and the monsoons and everything. Can you talk about like if you and the Sherpas and the team had a discussion about global climate change and global warming, because it is affecting the even as high up as Mount Everest, because there's places in like Chile, which is again part of where the Himalaya mountains, because it's such a vast plateau, stretches across to like those regions of the world, and into like Mongolia and stuff, and like global warming is impacting the entire globe, and like I remember I was reading, I think it was an article, I think a few weeks, no, it was I have to remember, we're in 2025, so in last year, where they were saying like they're really getting a close idea of like just how many bodies are still on Everest. And the reason they're doing that is because the ice is melting. The snow that covered the bodies is melting, and they're getting to see how much like pollution. And that's something that's mentioned in the film, where like they have these stipulations now where you have to clean up your garbage, because like people throughout the years have left so much garbage on the mountain that the Sherpas and the expedition companies are saying like, no, we will fine you if you leave your garbage, that you go up with it, you bring it back down. But they're getting to see how much garbage there is on the mountains because the snow caps are melting, So did you guys have any discussions about just the climate and global warming and how that would affect the expeditions as well? Because it's the windows for these expeditions is narrowing more and more each year.
Yeah, it's a very interesting. We do talk about it in the film. We do hint down at Ryan talks about the glacial recession and the gain. And it's up there. It has something. It's millions of years in the process, and so it's cyclical. Especially in a place like Everest that generates its own weather. It's so high, it's at 29,000 feet where jetliners fly. It generates its own weather patterns. And of course, it's directly related also, it integrates directly with the monsoons and the trade winds and the jet stream and so on. So it has a very profound effect on the weather in the area. So we talked about more about how it shifts from year to year. Like, for example, Tashi and I talked about the people, if anybody reads John Krakauer's book Into Thin Air, or watched any of the movies relating to that, for example, about the 1996 Everest disaster. They did a movie in 2015 with Jake Gyllenhaal and so on, a Hollywood film about it, and there's been documentaries about it. Depending on the year that you're there, you can still see those bodies on the mountain, like you mentioned. For example, the two main people in the movie that they talk about, they're specifically laying in certain locations. And one person, Scott Fisher, for example, who's one of the main characters in the movie, depending on the year, he's exposed. Other years, he's snowed over. So, Rob Hall, he's still in the exact same spot, and you can see where he is in my movie. And actually, you can also see it in the virtual reality film even more so, because you can spin the camera around and look back at the south summit at the rock where Rob Hall is still sitting today. So it's very interesting, because sometimes the glaciers move at different speeds. Sometimes there's a tremendous amount of snowfall that helps, add to the watershed up there, and some years it's dry, and so from Everest's perspective, it's too early to say how it's going to affect Everest in the long term, or how much impact the current cycle that we're in will have on Everest versus, let's say, a cycle down the road as it continues on, or maybe reverses itself in a different direction. It's very hard to say, but yeah, there's no question that the climate itself, year in, year out, and even in blocks of 20 years and so on, affects it. And another person in the film, that talks about it is Russell Bryce, of how the ice fall has changed over years. And so again, it's the shifting, based on weather patterns. And so it's a very dynamic and interesting thing for sure on Everest, and how it will affect this season, for example, in 2025. To be determined.
Yeah, no, climate change, like I mentioned, I've seen the effects of climate change, like going way back in like 30 years, because I'm 41 now, but like even as young as I would see it, because we would talk about coral bleaching. Coral bleaching is a result of like the ocean heating up, and like the UV rays being able to penetrate into the water more, because there's less plankton, there's less algae, like creating a barrier between the bottom of the sea and like the sunlight. So like I've been seeing like the effects of that for years. So like when I watch films like yours, that talk a lot about nature, like I'm always interested to talk about it, because it's me in my also small way of like trying to bring more awareness of it, because like as I said, like I'm so aware of like this vastness of that we live in, and it's just like I think it's our duty to preserve it as best as we can, and to look after it as best as we can, which is again something the Sherpas are very cognizant of. Like they're so respectful, and they're so they know their job is to take care of Chumaluma, to take care of the environment. And I just wish we Westerners had more of that, took on more of that responsibility and awareness. Like is one thing, like to be able to do something, but at least just to be able to know about it, like just be aware.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, they're very in tune to the region that they live in, but also spiritually with the world that they are engaged in. And yeah, I mean, Everest has changed a lot from that perspective. I mean, now they have expeditions every year that are just there to remove trash, tents, ladders, ropes, things like that from Expedition Pass. It's a very interesting situation. Everest is unique in many ways that way. The SPCC, or the Sagarmatha Pollution Control Committee that we talk about in the movie, they're in charge of the operations on the mountain. For example, the icefall doctors, who we talk about in the film, also the trash removal on the mountain and how it goes and gets taken down valley and so on. Yeah, it's very important, because now the expeditions have these trash deposits, security deposits, that the expedition members have to bring down certain amount of trash, otherwise they will lose their security deposit, which is a significant amount of money. The other thing is, this year, for example, they're initiating a process where you bring your own poop bags down. So now you have to bring that off the mountain as well. But it's a very arduous process, because not only dealing with all the altitude issues and the weather and all that stuff, and how hard it is to climb mountains, to climb that mountain in order to bring down any kind of trash from previous expeditions, but also the obligation of that. So, for example, in 2014, you had an avalanche, that killed, unfortunately, 16 Sherpas in the icefall. Well, that shut down Everest that year. 2015, you had an earthquake, that killed 19 people, on Everest. That shut down that expedition that year. Well, now what you're doing is, if you go back in 2016, you have tents, you have, oxygen bottles, you have stoves, you have all kinds of different equipment that's sitting on the mountain that was never removed back down. But now you're saying to, for example, a team in 2016, yeah, but now bring that stuff down too, even though it's not their obligation, right? So you have to kind of catch up with years past in order to get it to a new baseline for the years moving forward. And the SPCC and the expedition operators, many of them, and the Sherpa people themselves have done a very good job to try to get rid of all the previous year's trash, and equipment that's sitting on the mountain, in order to get it closer and closer and closer to that baseline where everybody wants it, which is a pristine, clean mountain. Then moving forward, keeping it at that level. So eventually they'll get there, and they're getting there faster and faster each year. And these new initiatives that are demanding for people to bring their own trash back down, and even their excrement now, is going to help big time with regards to keeping Chomolungma clean.
Yeah, and that's important because, again, it was Tashi and one of the other Sherpas who, I think it was Lamka, who talked about being conflicted, having the emotional and mental confliction that he feels with being reverent of the mountain of Chomolungma, and this being their deity, and having respect for the mountain and having respect for her as just this entity on earth, and climbing it, literally climbing on the back of this mountain that they believe is alive, and it's a deity. And it's just and that was very interesting to hear, just he's thinking, how do I just deal with this? And this is something that all of the Sherpas have to deal with, they're making they're making their living on the backs of this thing of this mountain that they worship. So I thought it was very interesting, and a part of that is environmental, they have to look after it, and it's this is how they also, again, show respect. They do their prayers, they do the pujas, but they have to clean it up. But they also have to encourage the people that come, because, again, the tourism industry is climbing Mount Everest. And I thought it was hilarious as soon as you got to Kathmandu, people say they're oh, you're going to climb Mount Everest. They're if I see a white person, they're coming to Everest, but that all ties into it, because they're saying these people, our livelihood, we're earning money for our families, to take care of our families and to contribute to the economy and everything through the tourism industry of climbing Mount Everest. But in the process of that, we have to make sure that this process doesn't harm the mountain, it doesn't harm Chomolungma, that it doesn't go that it doesn't contradict our sacred beliefs and our spirituality. So I thought it was also very interesting dynamic to see play out, because the environmentalism goes hand in hand with that,
Yeah, Carolyn, 100% right. And that was one of the main things that we wanted to highlight in the movie is, again, it's not so much about me climbing Mount Everest as it is about the people that make a living on Everest, and again, how it impacts the country. For example, during the spring climbing season, and it's also trekkers. I mean, it's more trekkers, obviously, way more trekkers than climbers themselves. But between the trekking and climbing in the Khumbu Valley or Sagarmatha National Park, during that time of the year, that's the second richest part of Nepal. So think about that, how much impact that has, for a country that's 165th poorest country on earth. So it's a very significant source of revenue, not just for Nepal itself, but definitely for the Sherpa people. And so, that trekking industry and the climbing industry and that balance of how they can be stewards to their national park wherever sits, and also to their deity wherever sits, at the end of the Khumbu Valley, is very, very important to the Sherpa people and to the people that live up and work up in the Khumbu Valley.
No, for sure. And I have to appreciate that you showed that, because I've seen films, not only just about climbing Mount Everest, but just people going on these grand expeditions and stuff. And very rarely do they pay attention to the environmental impact of their own actions, but to the people who come before them, and also not given as much time to having the indigenous people, the people of that land, speak for themselves. Very often it's the filmmakers, or usually just often white Americans or Europeans, speaking over the people, or speaking for them. And I have to just say, I appreciate how much time you're giving the film to them, because like you said, climbing part of the climbing the mountain is actually a very small part of the film. The majority of the film is the whole aspect of getting to the mountain, you know, and being in Nepal and in Kathmandu. Like climbing the mountain is just like the last 15 minutes of the film.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long, like we said, it's a long process getting up there, and I'm glad that you also recognize that, Carolyn, because it's really, I'm just a conduit to the information. It's about Kumar, and it's about the Hindu sadhus, and it's about Tashi, and it's about Pasam, the monks, and so on. It's about them, and I'm just a conduit to that information, and hopefully people are able not just wowed by the scenery and maybe even about the story, but they learn something that they normally wouldn't have learned if they watched something that deals with Mount Everest. Because the one thing that we don't really know much about here in the West is about Nepal. So there's two things that really always come up when you think about Nepal. You think about Doctor Strange, because they filmed some scenes in Kathmandu, big Marvel blockbuster, and then Mount Everest, because it's what put Nepal on the map since 1953 when it was first ever climbed. But you don't know really about the history, the Hinduism, the Buddhism, the strifes that they've had with their civil war and stuff that I talk about in another film that I did, and these kind of things. So these are the things that are most important to me, and that's what the Quest series is all about, this ongoing documentary series, to take people on these educational thrill rides in order to reveal these rarely seen stories that they normally wouldn't be able to see or experience, and especially in the West, in Europe and in North America, for example, where we don't get a lot of that localized information that you would, for example, if you lived in India or Nepal or something like that and did a film on that area of the world. So that's very important to me, is to really engage with the local people, because it's their story that I'm trying to listen to and to present to the viewing audience, not so much my story, except for the fact that it relates to their story of why I'm there.
And I agree that because that's kind of what I want to do as myself. That's why I call myself now a film culture critic, because I'm looking at how I also look at the intersection of culture and film, and how film highlights culture, and how film is a median, a way to teach people about different cultures. And again, Nepal and stuff that kind of interests me, because I did a couple of interviews for a couple of Bhutanese films last year, Bhutan kind of sits very close to Tibet, and there is the political aspects, of China, the conflicts between China and Tibet, but also Bhutan and Nepal, and how all of these things kind of coalesce together, So that's one of the reasons, again, I wanted to speak to you, because and I want people to be more curious about the world. I find people, especially again in North America, are not very curious about the world they live in, I grew up, my mom, we had this gigantic cardboard atlas book, and it was a book that would teach you about the flags, and the Mount Everest sits prominently in this thing because it is such a big mountain, but also the entire Himalayas is if you look at that part of the map of that world, the Himalayas covers literally almost the entire part of the book. It was I think it was called the Big Atlas Book of the World, I think is what it was called. But I've always been just curious about the world we live in, so I'm always trying to do interviews with filmmakers who are highlighting the culture in the world. It's not just about Hollywood blockbusters, but who's teaching us about the world, because I don't understand in curiosity. I'm person. I'm the kind of person I would go and if I watch a film, someone would say something, I'll go well, let me go and look at this and see what they're talking about. For your film, I didn't realize, I knew Sherpas was the last name, but I didn't realize it was actually the common last name of the people in that in the Kambu area of Nepal. I didn't realize this, but in watching the film, it made me go and look up. I was is this possibly the last name? Because I'm and then I realized, it's the last name. It's their surname, as you were saying. The reason is caused because they're the people from the east, Sher is a Tibetan word for east, and Pa is for persons, so it literally translates to people of the east. So I'm just encouraging people to be curious about the world.
And that's right, because a lot of people don't know that. People have this synonymous name of Sherpa, meaning that's a mountain god. It's not. It's an ethnic group that came from the Kham region, of eastern China. So, Western China. And so they came over and, about 640 years ago to try to find a place where they could find refuge and to worship in peace versus the religious persecution that they were engaged in back in the Kham region of China, or Tibet. So, that's again, something I hope people will get to learn when they watch the movie is that the Sherpa are actually an ethnic group. They're not. It doesn't mean porter and it doesn't mean mountain climber at all. But that's what most people think that watch movies about Everest. They think, the Sherpa is just a name for a guide or a porter, and that's not the case at all. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap it now, but so talk to me about the Quest series. So what are you've conquered Everest? My goodness. Again, very, 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 very few people. You're one of a few number of people who can say that, and that's including the Sherpas who do get to, because not all of them climb the summit. Some of them stay in base camp. But talk to me about what's next for you. What are you working on next?
Yeah, that's right. Like I hinted a little bit earlier, it's an ongoing documentary series, and the next one's going to be in Africa, actually. And so we're going to go this year to shoot the next quest, and then we have the next 3 or 4 locations around the world kind of isolated where we want to go next. And it's dependent on, of course, geopolitical situations, weather, time of the year, that kind of stuff, because in different parts of the world that can be dependent on whether or not you go there. But yeah, it's an ongoing series, and again, like I mentioned before, it's designed to take global audiences on these educational thrill rides to reveal these rarely seen, fascinating cultural stories from some of the most exotic places on Earth. So right now, you can see the Quest Everest, you can see the Quest Everest VR in 2D or in virtual reality, by going to thequesteverest.com. But then we also have the next one that'll be coming, and we're going through starting the planning process now, that long process to go shoot the next one, which will only take probably 3 weeks, but it'll be almost a whole calendar year or more of planning by the time we get there and actually pick up a camera. So yeah, it's an ongoing documentary series, and so yeah, hopefully people can look out for the next quest coming down the road, and if they're interested and they're excited to see what they saw with the Quest Everest and the Quest Everest VR, maybe they'll want to go see the next one as it comes along. So
can you say which countries you'll be in?
I can't say yet, but the hint is I'll give you a hint. I'll give you a general area. It's going to be in East Africa. So yeah,
it's just such a wide area though.
Yeah, there's 54 countries in Africa. So I'm giving you some of it a hint, but I can't tell you exactly yet because I don't want to give the story away yet.
Yes, I will ask him after I cut.
That's right.
You guys won't get to know, but I'll ask. But thank you so much, Alex, for taking the time for talking with me, and thank you so much to everyone on the team, all the Sherpas, the monks. Okay, so the monk that you spoke to, I wanted, because I had his name, says Vanten Saint Sherpa, who was the Buddhist monk that you spoke to. So everyone that took the time to speak with you, all the cinematographers, the cameramen, the musicians, everyone that worked with you on this film. Thank you so much. I think everyone did a fantastic job.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Carolyn. And do me a favor and make sure that you and your audience enjoy the rest of your day.